In May 2025, far above the Baltic Sea, the calm gray horizon carried more weight than most people on the ground would ever know. Two aircraft approached, heavy and deliberate, their wings stretching like shadows across a fragile piece. They were not simply planes, they were messages carved into the sky, reminders that power does not always arrive with explosions. Sometimes it drifts in silence, slow and steady, daring someone to react. What unfolded that day was not a battle, but it was close enough to one. A warning without smoke, a threat without words, a moment suspended. The flight into tension. The story began far from the Baltic Sea, in the runways of England. Dawn was gray and heavy with mist when the engines of two B-52H bombers roared to life. Their wings stretched wide, their bodies towering above the ground like relics of another age. These were not aircraft designed to slip through unnoticed. They were built to be seen, to be felt, to carry with them the weight of a history that stretched back to the Cold War. Every time they lift off, they bring with them the reminder of what they can carry and what that power represents. Their mission had a simple name: Bomber Task Force 25-1. But behind that number lay a complex signal. This was not just training. It was present, time to be noticed. Their flight path took them eastward, toward a stretch of sky where invisible borders are guarded more tightly than land itself. The destination was not a city, but a region: Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily armed outpost by the sea. This mission was different for another reason. For the first time, the B-52s were not flying alone. Swedish and Finnish aircraft rose with them, the newest members of NATO, now woven into the alliance's fabric. Their presence changed everything. No longer were these nations neutral observers at the edge of Europe. They were part of the line, flying beside American bombers as allies. The planes did not need to cross the Russian border to make their point. Simply drawing near was enough. Each mile eastward pressed the message harder. NATO had grown, it was stronger, and it was not afraid to fly close. High above, the gray sky became a canvas where resolve could be written without words. Russia responds. Kaliningrad does not sleep. Beneath its forests and coastal towns, radars turn day and night, sweeping the horizon for anything unusual. When the signal of two B-52 bombers appeared on Russian screens, it was impossible to mistake. The shape, the size, the slow, steady track across the map, all of it spoke louder than words. Within minutes, two Su-27 fighters were ordered into the sky. Their climb was fast and sharp, cutting through the gray air with a kind of urgency that had no room for hesitation. No announcements were made, no warning messages were sent. This was not an escort. It was a pursuit. As the jets drew closer, the calm air above the Baltic began to feel heavy. Pilots on both sides knew exactly where they were heading. The bombers continued straight, steady, and deliberate. The fighters approached with speed and precision. Each second closed the gap, narrowing the distance between machines that represented two very different worlds. It was no longer just a flight path, it was a collision of intent, and neither side looked ready to turn away. The close encounter. The Baltic sky tightened as the distance shrank. From the cockpit of the B-52, the crew could see two dark shapes cutting through the haze. The Su-27s were now close enough for every move to matter. Silence filled the radios. The only sound was the constant rumble of engines and the faint hiss of oxygen masks. One Russian jet held position off the wing, steady and sharp. The other broke away, dipping low, then rising again with sudden force. Its radar flicked on for a moment, locking briefly onto the bomber's frame. It was not an attack, but it carried the same weight as one. Inside the B-52, hearts beat faster. No one spoke, but everyone understood. Then came the maneuver. With full afterburners, the Su-27 surged upward, slicing just above the bomber's nose. The turbulence shook the giant frame, rattling panels and controls. For a second, it felt like the sky itself had been torn open. The bomber stayed its course, refusing to react. The Russian jet pulled away, but the message was already clear. This was not a chance. It was a warning written in motion, daring the Americans to flinch. Aftermath in the skies. The dramatic pass was over in seconds, but the sky did not relax. Both sides held their positions. The B-52s pressed on, heavy and steady. The Su-27s lingered close, sharp and watchful. No missiles were fired, yet the sense of danger only grew stronger. Far away, NATO command posts lit up. Screens tracked every movement, marking the bombers, the fighters, and the invisible border lines between them. Orders went out quietly. AWACS aircraft lifted into the air, their wide eyes scanning every mile of sky. Tankers adjusted their position, ready to refuel Allied jets if the mission stretched longer than planned. On the Russian side, preparations were just as quick. Kaliningrad's missile batteries powered up, radar sweeping outward in wide arcs. Each system mapped the intruders, ready to respond if the situation shifted by even a fraction. Neither side called for retreat. Neither side lowered its guard. What had started as a patrol was now a test of patience, unfolding above calm waters that reflected nothing of the storm building overhead. The encounter had ended in form, but its shadow remained heavy. Two versions of truth. When the jets finally broke away, the story began to split. In Washington, officials described the flight as routine, a standard mission through international skies, legal, calm, and necessary. The words were chosen carefully, carrying the tone of control. In Moscow, the picture looked different. State media called it a provocation, a test of Russia's borders, a show of force meant to humiliate. For them, the bombers were not peaceful symbols. They were threats hovering just outside the walls of Kaliningrad. Neither version was false, yet neither told the whole truth. These encounters live in the space between perspectives, shaped as much by fear as by fact. Each government crafted its message not only for its people, but for the other side. Above the Baltic, the real message had already been delivered, not in words, but in flight paths, radar locks, and the quiet refusal to turn away. And it was that silence, more than any headline, that carried the greatest danger. The dangerous dance. The bombers did not alter course. Their wings stayed level, their engines steady, as if nothing had happened. The Russian fighters also refused to back away. They hovered nearby, moving like shadows, always close enough to remind the Americans they were not alone. This was not combat, but it felt like it. Every movement was deliberate, every second stretched thin. To retreat would look like weakness. To push harder might ignite something neither side wanted. So, the encounter settled into a tense balance. A dangerous dance where neither partner trusted the other, yet neither dared step aside. Analysts later called it posture, a contest of nerves played out in the open sky. The bombers showed presence, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. The fighters answered with speed, precision, and the constant hint of aggression. Together, they created a moment that was more than a patrol, but less than a battle. It was proof that silence can still roar, and above the Baltic, that roar echoed far louder than words ever could. The historical echo. Moments like this are not new. History has shown how a single spark in the wrong place can set off a fire no one planned. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident began with confusion at sea. Reports were unclear, signals misread, yet those brief minutes of uncertainty opened the door to years of war in Vietnam. The Baltic encounter carried the same kind of weight. A radar lock that lingers too long, a maneuver seen as hostile, even a burst of static on a radio, any of these could be mistaken for an attack. And today's skies are less forgiving. The weapons are faster, the margins smaller, the consequences far greater. What happened in May was not war, but it showed how thin the line has become. A few heartbeats of misunderstanding could be enough to repeat the past, only this time under the shadow of nuclear reach. History warns, but it does not always prevent it. The rising pattern. The incident above the Baltic was not an isolated moment. In the past year, these close encounters have increased sharply. American bombers, surveillance planes, and drones are often shadowed the same way, each time drawing Russian fighters into the sky. What once felt rare now feels like routine. Every new intercept builds on the one before it. Each side pushes a little closer, holding its position a little longer. Success without collision creates a dangerous illusion that the risks can always be managed. But the margin for error does not grow, it shrinks. Military reports show a steady climb in risky maneuvers across Europe, some with distances closing to just a few hundred meters. A slip of the hand, a gust of turbulence, or a radar misread is all it would take to change a standoff into tragedy. Patterns like this do not fade quietly. They grow until something breaks. And in the skies, breaking often comes fast. The Baltic standoff ended without fire, but its silence was louder than any battle. 2 bombers flew home. 2 fighters returned to base. The waters below remained calm, yet the risk above them had grown. Every encounter like this leaves a mark, an invisible line drawn tighter than before. The question is not if another will come, but when and how close it will be. At 30,000 feet, there are no pauses, only choices made in seconds. One wrong move could turn routine into disaster, and once the sky breaks, there is no easy way to mend it.